Welcome to An Honorable Profession, a podcast giving America hope since 2018. I'm Ryan Coonerty. Along with Debbie Cox Bolton of the New Deal, I'm lucky enough to be your co-host. An Honorable Profession is a New Deal Leaders podcast. The New Deal is an organization that supports the next generation of American leaders. From attorneys generals to state senators to mayors to school board members, these are the people that are pushing policies and politics that will respond to climate change, rebuild our economy, address racial injustice, and restore our democracy. These are incredibly talented people who have dedicated themselves to public service when their country and their communities needed it the most. Check out newdealleaders.org to see what I'm talking about. Today we talked to Mountain View City Council member Chris Clark. Chris has worked for some of the biggest tech companies in the world, but by night he's a Mountain View City Council member and former mayor. We talk about what tech can learn from local government, what local government can learn from tech, how they've tried to address the housing crisis and build a consensus, and how government can try more things, do more things, and have a bigger impact for their community. Enjoy. Mountain View Council member Chris Clark, welcome to An Honorable Profession.
Thank you.
I want to start by contrasting sort of your day job and your night job of being on the city council. In your day jobs, you've set policy for some of the biggest global tech companies in the world. At night, you're worrying about potholes and crosswalks. Talk about that juxtaposition and why you balance the two.
Yeah, it seems a little strange, but it's something that I really enjoy. You know, at my day job, you can go in at a tech company or any company where you have some level of managerial control, and you can make change very, very quickly. But you're not impacting. You might impact the users of a particular product or something like that, but you're not having a direct long-term impact on your neighbors per se. You may be a product that they use, but not necessarily their daily lives in every case. Whereas with policy, you're making decisions that might take 5 or 10 years to come to fruition, and it can be incredibly frustrating to get through the democratic process. But 10 or 15 years down the line, when you look back, in many ways, those decisions and a lot of the things that we've put together in Mountain View are much more impactful, I think, to the long-term health of the community, especially when you see kids going through the school systems and graduating and talking about new developments or things that happen to be there that weren't there 10 years ago.
And I mean, from your perspective, and in my experience, big tech doesn't spend a lot of time thinking about local government. And local government sort of also doesn't know what to make of technology. We tend to be the slowest adopters of new technology. What do you think the two don't understand about each other? Both big tech understand about local government and local government understanding about tech.
Yeah, I think the things that tech companies and a lot of companies, frankly, do is they don't think about local government until they need it, right? And that's true, I think, of individuals too. But as long as something isn't a thorn on your side, you're not thinking about it until you need it, until you need to build that new building or get that permit or whatever. And so I think one of the mistakes that the companies make is not building those relationships over time, especially if you're really tied to a particular jurisdiction. I think building those relationships as policymakers come and go, having that staying power and just investing a little bit of time to be involved in the local community and getting to know your policymakers that goes a long way. And then I think the thing that regulatory bodies like cities and others forget about, tech and others, is they also don't necessarily pay that much attention until something bubbles up and they really have to think about it. And so I think if both sides were a little bit more proactive and just getting to know each other over time as people come and go, then you can pick up the phone or send that email and there's someone on the other end who's going to help, as opposed to you having to fight through a bunch of red tape.
And We're at the NewDEAL Forum Ideas Summit,
Yeah.
and one of the big themes of the week or of the gathering has been how do we speed up government, make it more effective, make it more responsive, maybe focus a little bit less on some of the processes you just talked about. Um, what are there any lessons we can learn from how technology companies operate, make decisions that you think can be applied to local government to get us through faster, to get better services for our constituents?
I think one of the things that you know our cities and our democracy is set up to take a little bit more time to for these things just to they have to go through a democratic process, and that's a good thing. But I do think that cities, especially in California, where there's a lot more regulatory red tape and things just take a lot longer. One of the things that we've tried to do in Mountain View and that some other cities have started is just to be willing to try things on a trial basis and just make it very clear to your constituents that we're going to try this thing for a year and see how it goes, and we'll learn from it. And if it's good, then we'll adopt it. If it's not so great, then maybe we'll make some changes or we'll just jettison it. And so, just an example of Mountain View is, you our bicyclists and our active transportation community has really wanted to do what we call a road diet on a 4-lane road, add in safer bike lanes and everything. But there were a lot of concerns around parking and turn lanes and everything. And so, what we decided to do was take it, basically temporarily remove a lane for a year, not totally repave or reconstruct everything, see how it goes for a year, and let the data tell us and the feedback from our residents about what we want to do long term. And so far, that's been really successful. So it was a long way of saying I think being willing to trial different things in areas where there wouldn't necessarily be a huge safety or other impact can really kind of create a pathway to implementing new ideas a little quicker.
I gotta say, from my time in the city and county government, like it just felt like we were always making big final plans that freak everybody out
Yeah.
instead of just trying things, iterating, try another thing, iterating. And that approach, which is obviously how you develop software and other products, just makes so much more sense because no one can anticipate the unintended consequences of any decision, right? And it has that impact. So you grew up in rural Illinois, and now you find yourself in the heart of Silicon Valley, both working professionally and serving, in the hometown of Google. Tell us about that path.
Yeah, it was a long one. So I grew up on a farm in the Midwest, and I knew pretty early on that I wanted to go out and explore a bit. So I ended up being a page for the House of Representatives in DC when I was 16, and moved out there, went to school, caught the bug, had an incredible counselor there who helped me get into apply for some summer programs, and I ended up doing undergrad at Stanford and moved out and just kind of fell in love with the area and the diversity of the area because it was something that I hadn't necessarily experienced growing up, and I learned an incredible amount there. Um, Studied political science and economics, and I've always been focused on, at least during that period, I was much more interested in international relations and federal policy to some extent. And so I did an internship with the State Department. Um, and I was really interested in maybe long term being looking at staying at the State Department or doing something maybe on the Hill at a committee staff or something like that in an area that I was really interested in. But right out of college, I decided to do a rotational management program with one of the large companies that do those. GE does one, AT&T, Boeing, and I ended up going with AT&T, bounced around the country, and the problem with that was a great experience, but I think the issue was you can't really put down roots in that scenario. And so once I pulled the ripcord from AT&T and joined my friend's startup back in Mountain View, I was looking at where to live, and Palo Alto is a little bit more exclusive and expensive, but I was also looking at where I can start to get involved, and Mountain View seemed to have a very welcoming community. I'd seen younger folks get elected or at least get on commissions there, and so I decided to put down roots there and got on some commissions and seats opened up on council and ended up running and ended up getting on. And I never thought I'd be that interested in local policy, but I think being on the planning commission and being a swing vote on growth and development and other things was really impactful. It seems really silly, but the moment it all kind of clicked for me was I was the swing vote on a really large redevelopment of a shopping center, and they had this large parking structure they wanted to construct for it. And I remember making a comment that they really should utilize the roof of that structure for solar or something useful. And you drive by 3 years later and there's a parking structure with solar panels on it that wouldn't have been there had you not made that comment. And so that um, you might not be affecting as many people at a local level as you would at the state, but you do have a lot more influence in those nonpartisan jurisdictions.
Yeah, and we were talking about this just last night, just over dinner, but our towns are about 45 minutes apart. We were both sort of the young upstarts a decade ago or more when we were elected, and now we find ourselves more in the other side of young and with younger people on council. And I think what's been your experience as being one of the youngest mayor in your city to now an experienced long-term council member?
Yeah, it's been interesting to watch the evolution. So I was the youngest person ever elected in Mountain View, and then served as the youngest mayor. When I first joined council, so the first time that I ran, I was in my mid-20s in 2008. I lost that first time around, which was actually, even though I lost, very helpful because you learn so much from the campaign process. And then I was ready to go the next time seats opened up. Um, but in that environment, I was not just the youngest person elected, I was the youngest person on council by far. And even though the other council members were very welcoming and did everything they could to help get me up to speed and get me used to everything, there's those generational differences. Just you just have different perspectives on things. And so at the time, the council wasn't as diverse as it is today. I was by far the youngest person, but then over time, we ended up, with some generational turnover. With now I have 3 council members who are younger than I am. People from every walk of life, a much more diverse council. I mean, up until I came back on, we had 6 women, 1 man on council. And it's much more ethnically diverse now, and we have renters on council, which we didn't used to have, and so there's just much more representation. And I think you know I would like to say I started something, but really what happened was there was just some generational turnover, which happens occasionally. But it's been interesting to watch, and Mountain View's remained stable over that period, even though we've had a number of different folks come and go policy wise.
And do you ever offer advice to these younger council members?
Yeah, I mean,
If so, what is it?
at this point, they're pretty far in, so they don't
Yeah.
really need. If anything, they're yelling at me for not going along with some of their votes. But there is another generation that's even younger who's starting to get involved, and those are the folks who I think several of the younger members of council and even some of the older ones have been mentoring, trying, because I think one of the most important things that you do as a policymaker isn't just voting, it's also figuring out the pipeline and ensuring that once you're gone, the city's in, or whatever jurisdiction, is in good hands.
Yeah, the biggest legacy is who you bring up
Yeah,
behind you,
it
because
really is.
you're also not going to set a lot of policies over a term or even 2 terms.
Yeah.
And so it's important that the good decision makers are there. Can you tell folks about Mountain View? I mean, in some ways, it's a normal medium-sized town. In a lot of ways, it's very different than a lot of other medium-sized towns around the country.
Yeah, it's unique. So Mountain View's about 87,000. So it's roughly the population of Santa Barbara, for those who are looking for a comparison. But we're only 12 square miles. So we're tiny geographically. It's pretty dense. Our daytime population more than doubles because we have Google's headquarters. We have Microsoft Silicon Valley headquarters is there. LinkedIn is headquartered there. So we have a lot of large and small tech companies. There's some biotech and but basically we have a really large daytime population that comes in. And it's in the heart of Silicon Valley, right next to Palo Alto, it's the next city south. And but we like to say it's a small city with a big heart. So we're much more diverse than I think Palo Alto is. We have 60-something% renters in Mountain View, and so even though the cost of living is going up, it's impacting us just like everyone else. We've been able to retain some of the diversity that we've had historically in Mountain View.
And how is it deal in relationships with these companies that are, of such a huge and bigger scale than the city of Mountain View could be? They have more attorneys, more everything. How do you approach those negotiations?
Yeah, I think for things like land use, I mean the biggest thing with Google and others is just land use, and so we bring in experts in those fields, consultants, but we also kind of know what we're doing too. I mean, we've been very strategic over time. For example, to most of the land that Google is using is actually the city of Mountain View's land. It was once a landfill that's been closed, and that whole area was a regional park, and so very wisely, or some of our predecessors very wisely, didn't sell it to Google. They didn't, or they did really long-term leases, and so that has created stable revenue for us over the long term through a number of economic cycles. And so, Google is, and a lot of the companies know that if they don't, uh, they kind of stay out of the political stuff because they don't want any sort of backlash associated with that. They have bigger fish to fry, and so it's really about negotiating the land use and other things, which which we have a whole team that helps us do all of that, and we've gotten some expertise over the years in doing that
Yeah,
too. So
I bet. Uh, I mean, I think one of the things that having those large companies does is create revenue streams, certainly do create a lot of good jobs.
yeah,
It also puts pressure on your housing stock,
it does.
enormous pressure. Can you talk about both sort of how it puts pressure on your housing stock and the scale of that, but then also how you've tried to adapt through public policy and land use?
Yeah, I think so. One of the misconceptions about us is that because we're the home of Google, we must be rolling in money. But remember, Google doesn't create a bunch of physical products that they sell out of stores in Mountain View. So we don't we're not getting tons of sales tax revenue. They lease our land, so we do have that income stream. But overall, I mean the impacts that all those employees coming in create in terms of all the infrastructure that we have to keep up is pretty significant. And so we aren't rolling the money there. The other thing, as you alluded to, is that folks want to live nearish to where they work, especially in the Bay Area because of traffic. And so that has created an enormous amount of demand for housing in not just Mountain View, but elsewhere in the Bay Area with all the tech companies, and it's driven up the price of housing. And traditionally, California has struggled to build housing, and including Mountain View. We had a very different council when I first joined. That wasn't, um, um, I wouldn't say as pro housing as they are today. It's not that they were anti housing. It's just that it was just a different time, and what people were comfortable building was very different. And so now, we were the first city in Santa Clara County to be designated a pro-housing city by the state of California, which was a big deal recently. And so we've tried to turn that around, but unfortunately, no matter how cities don't, people forget that cities don't build housing. They zone for it, but if you're in a nasty economic cycle, um, it might not get built, and then you don't have the then you still have that upward pressure on pricing until that housing gets built. So we've been zoning for more and more housing, and we've done a really great job of adding thousands and thousands of units through the last economic cycle. But things have cooled off a bit. But I think Mountain View and the surrounding areas are still very expensive, but what we've done is, I think, the rate at which those housing prices are increasing is slower than it was, several years ago.
Becoming a pro-housing city and getting that density is not politically easy.
No,
How have you and the council managed to create a consensus that housing was needed, should be built, should be zoned for?
well, I wish I could say we have. I am perpetually. I've never been the top vote getter. I'm always kind of that person who, um, people find just barely acceptable enough to reelect, because I believe it's important. Good policy is important, and a lot of times when you're uh, a lot of times the best policy decision is the one that makes everyone in the room slightly uncomfortable.
Mhm.
And so we've had those backlashes in Mountain View. We went down a path toward not putting housing out by Google, and then the council was taken over by a pro-housing majority, and then that majority was lost after a few years because I think they pushed folks a little beyond their comfort zone. There are other reasons, I'm sure, but it's just important to, as you said, just strike that balance. So when you're talking to voters and helping them I think Stacey Abrams talked yesterday about values first, and so I think when you're knocking on doors and you're talking to voters, you know, they might initially say, "Oh, this young kid," or they might write you off because you were currently on council and they're really mad about this one thing. But if you talk to them about, they might ask you about a housing project or something like that. But if you talk about um, how you make decisions and why and your thought processes, and they get that they're not always going to agree with you and that you're not always going to vote the way that they would want you to on a particular thing. They just want to know that they can trust that you thought about all the what they have to deal with in this particular neighborhood, or you've thought about all the unintended consequences that might come with things. And if they're comfortable that you're actually thinking about those things and you're not just in it for yourself, they'll vote for you. Or they'll make you one of their 4 votes, or because we're still at large. But I think just being open and honest and transparent with folks about how you make decisions, and then you actually doing that, and demonstrating how that you're doing what you said you were going to do is more important to folks than how you stand on a particular issue in most cases.
It's funny, yeah, when I meet with like people who are getting ready to run, and they sort of initially when they meet with you, they're sort of running through all these litmus test issues.
Yeah.
And I'm always like, no, no, I want to understand, like, how do you think about this, what your values are? Because chances are the most important votes you're going to take are something that nobody is talking about. It's
Mhm.
unanticipated. So I just want to know like what your decisions are. And I think we don't give voters enough credit for also being willing to think that way. Unless they just get too mad over a specific issue.
Especially in a nonpartisan local race where, they're not thinking about party, they're just thinking about, does the trash get picked up and those sorts of things. Folks do their homework. Um,
Can I ask? I mean, you're balancing high, two high pressure jobs. How do you manage your priorities, your time, all those things in order to be effective at both?
It took a while to figure out, but I think each year the nice thing about the public service piece in the council is my schedule. We have a meeting in December where we set the schedule for the next year. So it's not that there won't be special meetings and things come up, but I know when all the regular meetings are going to occur for the year. So I basically schedule my life around all of those sets of things initially, and then all the committees and commissions that you get on outside of that, those also tend to have set schedules, and then you just have to carve out uh, half a day, maybe a day a week to just deal with whatever comes up. So you have a block that you can just schedule people in where some developer wants to meet, some constituency group or a neighborhood group wants to talk about pickleball or whatever it is. um,
Everyone wants to talk about pickleball.
yes,
all the time.
don't especially right now. Pickleball versus tennis, and that wasn't on my bingo card for this particular cycle. But I think just having that flexibility, and then everything else is work. So So I know when my city meetings are, and I know I have that block of time that I can schedule constituents or whomever for city meetings, and then everything else is just dedicated to work. And I try and keep those worlds separate, which probably isn't psychologically healthy, but I try and just keep the two worlds separate to the extent that I can. And that's worked out over time. You have to make some tweaks, but the nice thing about the policy stuff is you know a lot of those meeting times in advance.
Right. And then sort of, how do you think about what's next? The world is changing, technology is changing. There's always an office to run for, do something with. Like,
Yeah.
how do you think about that?
I think it's both incredibly rewarding to be in public service in the Bay Area, and it's also incredibly frustrating because there is a line of 10 people for every office waiting for someone to die, retire, have a scandal. And as soon as they do, because it's mostly Democrats in that area, we all fight, and everyone feels like they deserve that particular seat, and then everyone fights, and then at the end someone wins, and we all have to sing Kumbaya, and and do it all again 2 years later. At the local level, it's nice because it's nonpartisan and you don't have to deal with that. So in thinking about, what you might, what might be next after term limits, one of the roles that I think would be incredibly rewarding is the county supervisor role. So in California, counties have an enormous amount of power for health, human services, and all the unincorporated areas. In Santa Clara County is massive population wise. So that would be a big role. That's also a full-time role, which you'd have to quit your job to do that, but that could be very rewarding. I think at the state level, you have to think about, again, that line of people who's waiting. And politics is one of those things where you can plan it out all you want, but at the end of the day, you just have to be ready to go when an opportunity presents itself, because it's just really hard to plan out because life happens. But at the state level, you have to think about quality of life too, especially if you have a family or other commitments, because you're on the road to Sacramento every single week. Then you're really into the party politics. And so when you get to Sacramento, you do what the leaders tell you, or else you won't have any power at all, and you'll just be a backbencher for your time there. So Sacramento is something you really have to kind of sign up for. The county is too, but at least you're not having to commute all the way to Sacramento all the time, and it's not as hard on your family and other things. But
Yeah, you're asking all the right questions. It's I've thought or lived through all those things, and it's exactly right. There is a real balance between what you can do, what you can get done part-time versus full-time, and then the role of party politics, certainly at the state and federal levels, is so much more significant.
Yeah, beyond the city, it's the next step that's a big decision, because you're kind of taking yourself out of the private sector for a while to do something full-time in the public sector.
Well, it is so fun having you back in the New Deal. You were with us for a while. You had term limited out, left, came back, and it's been wonderful to see you and to see the work that you're doing in Mountain View.
Yeah, thank you so much.
An Honorable Profession is a New Deal Leaders podcast. Thanks to the team at New Deal for producing this episode. We encourage you to bring honor to public service, and because we keep things honorable, no tax dollars are used in the making of this podcast.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group,